How's it going, everyone? This is Mike. Welcome back to Genre Files. This week we're doing musicals, and I have a good one for you. This is Gold Diggers of 1933, released by Warner Brothers. A few months before, Warner Brothers had put out a film called 42nd Street, which revolutionized the movie musicals. And they had tried to do something different with camera work and the musical numbers to make them more exciting to people. When the sound era had come in, the late 1920s, the early 30s, there were dozens of musicals coming out because everybody wanted to hear people sing and watch people dance, and it was all very new. But the way they were filmed was very static and very uninteresting. They basically just set up a camera. Most of the time, they would just set up a camera looking at people performing on a stage. So it kind of lost its momentum after a few years, and people were staying away from musicals. Well, at Warner Brothers, they decided to try something different. So they hired a choreographer, a dance director named Busby Berkeley, to design and stage production numbers that were so big and so intricate they never could have been performed in an actual Broadway show. But they would use the context of people putting on a show in order to film these musical numbers, and it was a huge hit. So they did it again a few months later. They found a pattern that worked and made money, so they tried it again with Gold Diggers of 1933, and they would make several films in the same vein during the 1930s and be very successful at it. So this happens to be another, as I said, another let's put on a show type musical, and using very much the reality of the times they were living in, the Great Depression. And it opens up with none other than Ginger Rogers singing a song called We're in the Money, which of course the audiences of the time might have winced when they heard that because nobody had any money. So here were all these beautiful girls fronted by Ginger Rogers, dressed in these little skimpy outfits that were either silver or gold. It's hard to tell because, of course, this is made in black and white, but they were all covered in coins. What part of their bodies were actually covered were covered in coins. So she's singing We're in the Money, and all these beautiful girls are behind her, and they start doing this crazy choreography with dozens of coins kind of floating on their arms. And then Ginger comes back, and she sings the song in Pig Latin for no particular reason, but it is a lot of fun. So while all this is going on, we find out that we are in a rehearsal hall, and Ned Sparks, who had been in 42nd Street, he is the director of the show. And while he's watching all these people rehearse, here comes the sheriff and a bunch of guys in suits, and they shut the production down because Ned Sparks can't pay his bills, and there's no money. So the reality of the Depression and what's going on in real life of the people who would be watching this movie is addressed by the film, and then it makes it sort of it brings a lot of drama into this musical, which is also a combination of comedy and people trying to make it in that world, trying to survive. It focuses on three young women who are roommates and all in this show. We have Ruby Keeler playing a girl named Polly. We have Joan Blondell playing a young woman named Carol. We have Aline McMahon playing a woman named Trixie, who is a little bit older than these other girls, and she is sort of the resident comedienne of the group. But they're all trying to make it in show business and doing whatever they can to be successful. And they find out that they're going to have a chance to be in another show. Well, the plot gets very convoluted, and there's a lot of comedy and a lot of mistaken identity, people falling in love and arguing, etc., kind of things you would find in any musical during that era. And it really isn't important. What is important is that Busby Berkeley is creating these incredible musical numbers, and you see three big production numbers in this film. One featuring a song called Pettin' in the Park, sung by Dick Powell and Ruby Keeler and danced by Ruby Keeler. And they had also been in 42nd Street, so they were paired up as boyfriend girlfriend in that movie, again in this one, and they would go on to do many films the same way, pretty much. And then you have a very beautiful and incredible production number called The Shadow Waltz, which has, once again, featuring Dick Powell and Ruby Keeler, but also dozens of chorus girls all holding violins, right? Dancing around with violins on this grand staircase, and they have these crazy outfits, these dresses that kind of twirl around. They look like they're constantly twirling. Well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm really babbling here. I'm trying to describe this musical number, but it involves violins, right? So every one of the girls in the chorus in this number they're all carrying violins, and they're pretending to be playing them. Well, when the camera shoots this from above, and you look down at at these women with the violins, all of a sudden the screen goes dark, and the violins are lit by neon, and they're all twirling around. It's just very beautiful and very strange. And then at one point, all the dancers, they all move in such a way that the neon violins form a big shape of a violin. If that makes any sense whatsoever, why should it? The final musical number, which features Joan Blondell, is called Remember My Forgotten Man. And she sings the song, she sort of talks this song, because Joan Blondell is not a singer. And it's all about soldiers coming back from World War I, which, of course, 1933, it hadn't been that long ago. And what had happened to them when they came back, and a lot of them came back, they were injured, they couldn't find work, and then the Depression happened, and the world was just in absolute sadness and chaos for a lot of these men. So it's a musical number that is very serious, and it deals with a very serious and complicated issue of the time, and it doesn't pull any punches. And a lot of people might look at this number today and find that it's a little bit hammy or overdone, but if you look at it from the point of view of people who would be seeing it in 1933, it's very moving, and it's very well done. And that was the end of the film, Remember My Forgotten Man. So I don't know what else I want to say about this, except it was a great success. And there were, as I said, there were many other films made at Warner Brothers. They inspired other studios to make films like this. Some of them, well, they didn't have Busby Berkeley, because he was exclusively at Warner Brothers for a while. But a lot of the people in this went on to be very successful. Joan Blondell was a huge star at Warner Brothers. The top billed actor in this is a guy named Warren William, who was another Warner Brothers contract player who was very, very popular at the time. And we also have Dick Powell and Ruby Keeler, who also became big stars at Warner Brothers. Ruby Keeler would go on to make several films during the 1930s. She would actually leave films in 1941. Her career went into kind of a decline at the end of the 1930s, and she would be out of show business pretty much until 1971, when she made this amazing comeback on Broadway in a revival of an old Broadway show called No No Nanette, in which she tap danced. She was 60 years old. She got up there and she was tap dancing while she was back in this movie, and she was wonderful. I remember seeing her do a number from that show on television, and it was just incredible. People went crazy. It was very, very popular. And the dance director for that particular production was none other than Busby Berkeley. So Ginger Rogers this was her second film for Warner Brothers. She was also in 42nd Street, and she didn't get to do a lot of dancing in these films. She was mainly there to do comedy relief, and of course we get to hear her sing in Gold Diggers of 1933. But she would go on. She had already made a dozen films. She was not a newcomer. She had been working for a long time. She had also had great success on Broadway. But a few months down the road, she would go to RKO, and she would make a film with a newcomer named Fred Astaire in a film called Flying Down to Rio, and they would become the biggest stars of the 1930s as far as musicals. And Fred Astaire, later on in 1933, he would make his film debut in a musical at MGM called The Dancing Lady, co-starring with, well, he wasn't co-starring, he was actually just there playing himself and doing a couple of dance numbers with one of MGM's biggest stars, Joan Crawford. So that's how things, and then he met Ginger Rogers at RKO, and they just took off like crazy. And so anyway, Busby Berkeley made a lot of films during his long career. He later became a film director, and if you can find some of his best films in this wonderful box set. It has 42nd Street, Footlight Parade, Dames, and Gold Diggers of 1933, all which feature Dick Powell and Ruby Keeler. It also has Gold Diggers of 1935, and it also has this nice little compilation disc which features many of the best musical numbers from all those films that I mentioned, and some others, several of which I haven't seen, so I need to get around to it. But that is my movie for Genre Files this week, Gold Diggers of 1933. Let me know what you think, and if you've seen it. And I babbled on for 10 minutes, and that's way long enough. So comments are welcome. Have a good day.